Hello everyone. Today I'm sitting down once again to continue sharing the story of Tusen, a single mother, a very ordinary woman living through very ordinary days. This story doesn't begin with a great upheaval, nor does it rely on loud, dramatic moments to capture attention from the start. It begins with early mornings, rushed meals, familiar worries, and the quiet choices that Tusen has grown used to carrying on her own. Being a mother, being the pillar, being the one others lean on, all of it unfolds in silence, without needing witnesses. Today, I want to tell a very small slice of that life. Not to dwell on hardship, and not to seek sympathy. Simply to look together at how an ordinary woman chose to stand firm, and chose to love even when life was anything but gentle with her. Behind the door of the hospital room, Tusen woke when the afternoon had already begun to fade. Pale light slipped through the narrow gap in the curtains, laying a thin golden veil across the white walls. The room was so quiet that the steady movement of the second hand on the wall clock could be heard clearly, one tick at a time, slow and patient. The air carried the familiar scent of antiseptic, cool and clean, stretching every sensation as if time itself had slowed. Hai was still there. He leaned back against the hard chair beside the bed, his suit jacket folded neatly over the armrest, his tie long since removed. His gaze remained fixed on Tusen, never drifting away, as though if he allowed himself even a moment of distraction, she might dissolve into the silent emptiness of the room. He hadn't slept. That unmoving posture felt less like rest and more like waiting, quiet, steadfast, asking for nothing. Tusen looked at him for a long time, long enough to notice the faint lines of fatigue etched across his face, before she finally spoke, her voice soft and unhurried. "The meeting, did it go okay?" Hai lifted his head. His eyes met hers, unrushed, unavoidant. "It doesn't matter." Tusen didn't ask anything more. She closed her eyes briefly, as if exhaling something she had already understood. She knew there were answers that didn't need to be fully spoken, and some things, when held in silence, felt more complete. Outside the hospital room, the corridor was nothing like the stillness within. White lights stretched along the passageway, cold and uniform, illuminating every section of wall, every plastic chair lined up side by side. Footsteps echoed and then faded, sometimes hurried, sometimes unhurried, blending with the distant rumble of a gurney being pushed away. The space wasn't loud, but it wasn't quiet either. It was filled with small movements, sudden pauses. Someone walked past, glanced at the half-closed hospital door, then slowed their pace. Someone else stopped altogether, leaned in close, lowering their voice as much as possible, as if speaking even a little louder might let the words seep inside. I heard she slipped and fell on her own. The voice was soft but decisive, like a fact already passed along, needing no verification. I also heard she damaged the goods. Another voice followed, slower, carrying a restrained curiosity mixed with an unspoken judgment. "The company will probably handle it internally." The final sentence was spoken so lightly it nearly dissolved into the air, cold and familiar, as if everything would eventually be closed off by some administrative decision. The whispers weren't loud, yet they traveled far. They slid along the long corridor, struck the white walls, and went straight to the closed door of the hospital room. Hai stood just behind that door. He heard everything, every sentence, every word, not missing a single sound. His expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened, as though he were committing each detail to memory. His hand rested on the door handle, fingers tightening briefly before loosening again. He didn't turn it. He stood still, back straight, breathing kept deliberately even, as if reminding himself to wait. Not out of hesitation, but because he knew that sometimes silence and standing still were choices too. He didn't step out. Not yet, The HR manager came to visit when the room had just settled back into calm, when the sounds from outside had receded and the air inside had grown quieter. They entered with the neat, familiar bearing of people who always know where they are meant to stand. A notebook was in hand, pen ready, their gaze carefully measured, not too curious, not too cold. Every gesture carried a caution refined through countless encounters with similar situations. They asked a few brief questions, their voice even, clear, and measured enough to convey proper concern. Nothing probed too deeply, nothing truly hesitated. Notes were taken quickly and neatly, as if every detail already had a designated place, needing only to be filled in according to order. Miss San, please focus on resting. As for responsibility, the company will review it. The words flowed smoothly, neither excessive nor lacking, leaning toward no one. They were spoken like a familiar procedure, safe for all involved. Tusen listened from beginning to end, then gave a small nod, barely perceptible, almost weightless. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She made no effort to say anything beyond what they were already prepared to hear. Her expression remained composed, her eyes steady, as if she had long accepted that some things, no matter how often spoken, only disappear into empty space. When they left, the door closed softly, making almost no sound. The room returned to its familiar stillness, filled only with the quiet hum of machines and the steady breathing of two people. Hai turned to look at her. His gaze lingered a moment longer, his voice lowered, unable to hide his concern. "Why didn't you say anything?" Tusen didn't look at him right away. She stared up at the stark white ceiling, her eyes fixed on a distant point, as if arranging her thoughts one by one. When she spoke, it was slow and calm, neither tired nor uncertain, just clear and resolute. If they've already chosen to believe a different story, saying more won't change anything. She turned to him then, her gaze direct yet gentle, no blame, no plea, simply stating what she had already decided. "I don't want you to have to argue for me." Hai tightened his grip on her hand. Not forceful, but firm enough to convey a choice made long before, needing no lengthy explanation. "I'm standing because I choose to." Late in the afternoon, when the last light of day had withdrawn from the window and the room sank into a thin, fragile gray, Hai's phone vibrated softly on the tabletop. The brief sound broke the quiet, just enough to draw his attention. The screen showed the name of the factory manager. Hai glanced at it, neither hurried nor evasive. One breath passed before he answered, his voice calm and even, unhurried and without defensiveness. The call didn't begin with inquiries about anyone's health, nor did it offer a perfunctory apology. On the other end, the voice came slowly, words chosen with care, as though each sentence had been weighed before being spoken. Caution was carefully tucked beneath familiar phrasing, polite enough not to seem avoidant, yet distant enough to keep from touching the core of the matter too soon. They circled through a few lines, mentioning work, mentioning procedures, and only then arrived at what they truly wanted to ask, in a lowered voice. "Are you sure you want to pursue this?" The question was posed lightly, almost like a suggestion rather than an inquiry. It didn't carry concern so much as a quiet reminder that everything could still stop if Hai chose silence. All it would take was a moment of hesitation, a vague reply, and everything would close itself off as though it had never happened. Hai smiled faintly. The smile passed so quickly that, without careful notice, one might mistake it for a soft exhale. There was no sarcasm in it, no trace of amusement, just the composed reflex of someone who knew exactly where he stood and why he was choosing to remain there. "I just want to know where that oil came from." He spoke slowly, each word clearly enunciated, without raising his voice or pressing the point. There was no challenge in the sentence, only a request so simple it left no room to go around it. After he spoke, The line on the other end didn't respond right away. There was no denial, no explanation offered. Only a silence that stretched on, growing heavier with each passing second, long enough for one to hear their own breathing. I didn't press. He didn't ask again. He didn't repeat himself. He waited, calm, as if he had anticipated this very moment from the instant he saw the caller's name appear on the screen. And in that prolonged stillness, I understood. There are times when silence speaks louder than any confession. That silence was already the answer. I brought Tusen home on an evening of light, drizzling rain. It wasn't heavy, just a steady fall, enough to cool the air and leave the road in front of the house coated with a thin layer of water, reflecting the soft yellow glow of the streetlights. The rain tapped gently on the roof, on the steps, quiet and rhythmic, as if slowing every movement. He pulled the car up to the edge of the steps, opened the door, then wrapped his arms around Tusen and lifted her. His movements were so careful they were almost slower than usual. One step at a time, one stair at a time, he climbed steadily, his eyes never leaving the path beneath his feet. Each step was crossed as if he were counting silently, allowing himself no room for even the slightest mistake. Tusen rested lightly against his shoulder, her body relaxed, saying nothing. She simply let her breathing fall into that familiar rhythm of movement, a rhythm she recognized even without looking. Lavi ran out of the house by habit whenever she heard the car stop at the porch. She ran quickly, but the moment she saw her mother, she froze. Her gaze fixed on her mother's leg, wrapped in stark white plaster. The excitement faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then worry clearly written across her small face. "Does it hurt, Mom?" Tusen looked down at her. Her eyes softened, the corners of her lips lifting into a gentle smile as she kept her voice as light as possible. She reached out and softly smoothed Lavi's hair, still slightly damp with sweat from a day of play. "Mom just needs to rest for a little while." Lavi studied her for a few more seconds, as if making sure those words were true. Then she stepped closer, nestling against her mother, her small hand clutching the familiar hem of her shirt. I stood behind them, not stepping forward, not intruding. He remained still, watching for a long moment, watching Tusen's effort to keep her calm in front of her child, watching the trust and worry mingled in Lavi's eyes. And in that moment, he understood more clearly than ever, if he were even a step late, if he weren't standing exactly where he was now, that small, fragile world would lose its balance. When Lavi had fallen fast asleep, the house slowly settled into the familiar quiet of night. There were no footsteps, no voices, only the smallest sounds remained. The rain outside the porch thinning out, the faint draft of wind slipping through the doorframe, the steady breathing of a child in the next room. Tusen sat leaning against the bed, her back slightly tilted, her body resting against the headboard to ease the ache. The warm yellow light cast softly onto the opposite wall, forming a pool of gentle, yet still brightness. She looked toward the window. On the glass, the remaining raindrops slid slowly into long streaks, weaving together before fading away. Tusen's gaze lingered there for a long time, as if she were thinking of something she didn't yet give a name to. The room was so quiet she could hear her own breathing. "Do you regret it?" Tusen's voice was very soft, as if only to confirm a thought that had just passed through her mind. "For choosing me instead of your work?" I stood behind her, close enough to feel the weariness leaning into the space between them, close enough to hear every breath. He didn't answer right away. One breath passed. Then he spoke, his voice low, without hesitation. "I only regret not coming sooner." Late at night, the rain continued to fall steadily outside the porch. It wasn't heavy, nor did it stop. Raindrops struck the tin roof and slid along the edge of the eaves, creating a rhythmic, repetitive sound. The house was immersed in the dim glow of a night lamp, everything seeming to be wrapped in a thin layer of stillness. Hai stood leaning against the bedroom doorframe, not stepping inside. He had been there for a while, his shoulder resting lightly against the cool wooden frame, his arms relaxed at his sides. He didn't want to make any sound, not even the smallest one, as though a single movement might shatter the fragile sleep within. He watched Tusen sleeping on her side, facing the window. Her face was calmer than it had been during the day, her breathing slow and even. One hand rested along the edge of the blanket, a habit formed long ago, the habit of someone always ready to wake at the first sign of trouble, even in sleep. The hand wasn't clenched, merely placed there, but it spoke of a vigilance etched deep into her body. Hai watched for a long time, not in a hurry to look away. In that moment, he realized there were things he was still holding back. Words that had risen close to his lips, yet remained unspoken. Not because he lacked courage. Not because he feared facing them. Simply because he didn't want to place any additional weight on someone who needed rest, someone who needed a true moment of quiet. Outside, in the pocket of the jacket draped over a chair, his phone vibrated softly. The sound was faint enough for him to sense it, but not loud enough to wake anyone. Hai didn't answer. He stood still, letting the phone fall silent again. For the first time, he allowed himself to slow down. The next morning, Tusen woke to the smell of hot porridge filling the house. The scent of softly cooked rice, warm steam rising, was so familiar that it took her a few seconds to remember where she was. Morning light filtered through the window, not harsh, just enough to brighten the room gently. She lay still for a moment, listening to the faint sounds coming from the kitchen. Hai was standing there, his back to her. He leaned slightly forward, focused on the pot of porridge simmering quietly. Every movement was slow and steady, as if he didn't want to disturb anything, not even the calm of the morning. He didn't speak or turn around, yet his presence gave the house a completely different rhythm. "You don't need to take time off," Tusen said softly. Her voice was still a little hoarse after a long night, but clear. "I'm used to it." The words carried no reproach, nor were they a refusal. They sounded more like a habit spoken aloud, the habit of someone used to managing on her own, used to enduring, used to not burdening anyone for too long. Hai still didn't turn back. He remained still, as if letting the words settle before replying. "I'm not." His voice was low and brief. No raised tone. No further explanation. Just a sentence clear enough to place himself exactly where he had chosen to stand. He ladled the porridge into a bowl, set it carefully on the table, then slid it gently toward her. The bowl stopped right within Tusen's reach, thin steam still rising. No explanation. No promises. Just a choice, repeated through action. At the company, the internal meeting moved quickly. The conference room was brightly lit, white light evenly covering the long table and the neatly arranged folders placed in front of each person. The atmosphere was orderly and formal, without a single unnecessary gesture. Everyone took their usual seats, opened their documents, and exchanged concise remarks, going straight to the point, as if everyone already knew exactly what needed to be said and where it should end. There was little emotion in that room. Only reports read in even tones, figures, timelines, and procedures repeated in proper order. Assessments were finalized swiftly, with no prolonged debate, no questions straying beyond the framework. The meeting flowed along the familiar rhythm of an organization accustomed to handling everything through paperwork and brief conclusions. No one mentioned Tusen by her full name. Her name did not appear in any official statement, nor was it called out for clarification. Instead, a more neutral, more acceptable phrase was used, one easier to put into the minutes: the accident case. The phrase was repeated several times, evenly, enough for everyone to know what it referred to, yet distant enough to avoid naming a specific person, with a face, a family, and consequences that could never be contained within a few lines of a report. Hai listened from beginning to end. He did not interrupt, nor did he show any reaction. His expression remained unchanged, his gaze steady. In front of him lay an open notebook, a pen placed neatly along the edge of the page, as though he were accustomed to writing only when it truly mattered. He absorbed every small detail that was mentioned, missing nothing: how shift times were confirmed, how camera positions were described, who had been on duty that day. He noted it all quietly, methodically, line by line, as if it were merely the habit of long years of work, untouched by emotion. He didn't argue, nor did he defend. I only gathered enough to piece together what was being said and what was deliberately left out. Gathered enough to assemble a complete picture where every small detail had its place. He sat still, like someone long accustomed to standing behind a door, listening quietly, listening long enough and closely enough to know exactly when that door would need to be opened. In the afternoon, pale sunlight slanted through the window. No longer bright like at noon, but softened, gentler. Thin streaks of light touched the edge of the bed where Tusen was resting, stopping there as if afraid to disturb her. The room was quiet, filled only with the faint sounds of an afternoon moving slowly. Lavi sat beside her mother, doing her homework. She sat up straight, as she had been taught, though her shoulders curled in slightly from the effort of concentrating. Her notebook lay open in front of her, her pencil placed neatly along the edge of the page. She read each line slowly, each word still small and young, sometimes stopping to sound it out, mouthing it silently before continuing. The rhythm of her reading was uneven, but earnest, as if she feared that a single mistake might make everything fall apart. Whenever she hesitated, Lavi looked up at her mother. The glance lasted only a moment, quick and instinctive, like an unconscious check. Not to find the answer, but to be sure her mother was still there. As though if she looked away for too long, if she didn't see her, her mother might disappear from her reach. Tusen noticed. She didn't speak right away. She simply lifted her hand and gently stroked her daughter's hair. Her fingers moved slowly, familiarly, gliding through the soft strands, a gesture repeated so many times in her life that it no longer required thought. "I'm here." Her voice was low and steady, without overemphasis, without the need to reassure too much. Just a simple sentence, ordinary, yet enough to fill the hollow space that had made the child uneasy. Lavi looked at her mother a little longer, as if pressing that image deep into her mind, then lowered her gaze back to the page. She continued reading, still slow, still soft, but no longer trembling. Hai stood outside the door. He didn't step inside. He leaned lightly against the doorframe, keeping that distance, listening in silence. Tusen's words reached him softly, yet they were enough to make him pause. Enough for him to understand something very clearly. There are reassurances that don't need to be spoken loudly, that don't need to be repeated again and again, that don't require long promises or commitments declared in front of many people. Sometimes, all it takes is one person steady enough to stay when everyone else chooses to turn away.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Này mình đang là vigil. mọi người. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video tiếp theo. Bye bye. Nhớ đón xem những video tiếp theo trên kênh mình nhé.